Morning, everybody. Thank you for attending this month's June's Omnicron PDU webinar. It's great for project managers and agilists and any leader who loves learning in their organization, always working on performance. It's National Productivity Day, so we're fitting right in. My name is Robin. You can't see me today, but I have my team. Heather King is our training director, and Brad, when he speaks, we don't have all the cameras up yet, but you'll see Brad in a minute. He's our VP of Sales, and super, super excited to have Dan back, our Dan Tousignant, who's going to talk today, and Dan is our Scrum and Agile and SAFE instructor, so we can also field any questions you have about SAFE. With that, Brad, go for it. What have you got? Some announcements.
Oh, always have announcements. You know, we always start out first in the news you can use section. Hopefully it will add value. Usually I say hopefully. Today I know it'll add value to you, and because it is really breaking news of what Omnicron has done. And before I get that, obviously, thanks for all the first timers who are showing up today. Always thank you to our alumni. We always appreciate you very much for continuing to show up. You definitely add value to the webinars. But here's the breaking news. Omnicron has been working diligently for what everybody has been asking for. And now with Omnicron and our partnership with IVCC, we now have college credit attached to all of our certification courses and our professional skills courses. And it is game changing, not only for Omnicron, but also it's a game changer for individuals on this webinar and across many companies across the world, basically, where now you get to leverage your tuition benefit finally. We understand a lot of you got degrees, you got your masters, and there's nowhere to use that beautiful tuition benefit that your company gives you. Most people get $5,000+ a year. Well, now you have a resource to reach out to use that. And just use this stat. I'm not going to tell you should take this training or that training or this certification. I just want to leave you with this one stat. And it's from the Lumina Foundation. Employees who take advantage of their tuition benefit, on the average, achieve 43% higher incremental wage gains. That's just for using your benefit. That's not even talking about what you learn, what certification you got, just leveraging it. So basically what we want to do is encourage everybody, if you are so lucky or blessed to have one of these benefits, definitely reach out to us. We know how they work. We can help you out. And I'll leave you with one story that I think will inspire most people. We have one of my good friends, alumni, some of you on here might know him, Roddy. In 90 days, Roddy was able to achieve 67 PDUs, 3 industry certifications, okay, in 90 days, all in his spare time from Omnicron's on-demand courses. So I share that story with you not to impress you, but more so to impress upon you. Reach out to us. You can do the exact same thing that Roddy did. And I think today after this call, I'm going to try to reach out to everyone who's on this webinar today. I'm going to personally call you, see if we can have a chat and see if I can add value to you in regards to leveraging your benefit and grabbing these Agile certifications or anything you might need. So with that, sorry for taking more than 60 seconds. It's really exciting though. And I'm going to hand this call over to Dan, the man, and everybody enjoy how to be Agile.
Well, that's exciting news for Omnicron, and it's exciting that you can offer a certification for Agile classes. That's still content that's not being offered in universities, so there's a huge opportunity there as well. Thank you, Robin and Heather and Brad, for having me today. And this topic is something that we've been talking about with Omnicron, because there's still a misconception in the marketplace about what it is to be Agile. So, we could talk for days about Agile, and I do for a living, but today we're just going to talk about Agile at a high level and make sure we clarify some common misconceptions. And I use this concept of being Agile is more important than really understanding Scrum or SAFe or other frameworks. You first need to understand what it means to be Agile. So our goal for this webinar is to, again, hit it at a high level, but leave plenty of time today to answer any questions that you may have, whether it be around specific frameworks or what it means to be Agile. I'm not going to respond to chat right now because I'm focusing on my screens, but Robin and Brad and Heather will be capturing any chats, and we can respond to those chats at the end of the presentation. Heather, Robin, Brad, if anybody jumps in with something that's a burning question that you feel is appropriate to interrupt my presentation, please feel free to go ahead. I'm happy to do that as well.
Great, thank you for that. Appreciate that. And guys, take advantage of Dan. He is awesome. So definitely get your questions in. Thank you.
So again, my name is Dan Tousignant, and I have a lot of the acronyms after my name for all the certifications out there. I'm certified in SAFe. I'm certified with the Scrum Alliance at their Scrum Professional level. I'm certified with PMI with the ACP, and I have all the Scrum.org certifications, the Professional Scrum Master, Professional Product Owner, and Professional Scrum Developer, as well as my original certification with Project Management Professional. So I have over 20 years of project management experience, and I stumbled upon Agile 17 years ago, actually 18 years ago now. I am by trade a project management consultant, and I was hired to go in and do some portfolio management for a company. And my statement of work said, you're going to be involved in Scrum. I thought Scrum was their project name, or I had no idea, had never heard the term Scrum. And all of a sudden I walk in, and my first day there, I went through Scrum Master training. So this is now 18 years ago. It was not very familiar to people. It was actually being led by Ken Schwaber, one of the authors of Scrum, and it was one of the first clients that he was rolling out formally. And actually, that client that I was at ended up in his book, Agile Project Management with Scrum. So I have a deep experience with it. That being said, I have no idea what I learned that first day. It was so overwhelming to me for someone who had just received their PMP. It took me 18 months to get my PMP, and all of a sudden I go to this one-day training, and then I was a Scrum Master. I was totally blown away and was very skeptical initially. But over the last 18 years, I've introduced Agile concepts, Scrum concepts more and more, found the value, used them to mitigate risk in some of my traditional projects. And for the last 7 years, I've been primarily training, coaching, delivering, managing, and working with Scrum and Agile teams. So lots of experience, and any questions you have, I always tell you, here's what I've seen in real life, here's what the book says, and somewhere in between may be your truth. So when we talk about Agile, Agile is a risk mitigation strategy. I want to be clear with those of you who are project managers. If you're a good project manager and you've been doing this for a while, you've introduced lots of different techniques to your own practice to prevent failure. Anyone who's been around for a while has experienced some form of project failure and has made changes just personally to improve that, either through best practices they've read about or through trainings they've been through. And what happened 17 years ago was the creation of the Agile Manifesto. And it was a mitigation strategy for people who are out there in the marketplace experiencing pretty dramatic project failures. So Agile is not something new. It was not something they pulled out of the air to say, let's try something different. Agile was created in response to just best practices. What are we trying to do to get better? Many of you probably do Agile techniques without calling them Agile. They're just ways to be more efficient, ways to be more lean, and to be more effective. So I lied. I'm going to bring up chat for a second here. If anybody wants to just throw out there why projects fail. In their experience, what have they experienced? What types of failures have they experienced? I'm trying to bring up chat. I'm not sure I can bring up chat from my end. So Heather or Robin, I'm going to ask you to read if anyone throws out any.
Oh yeah, you're just, it's going full crazy now. So lack of clear requirements, changing deliverables, lack of resources, scope creep. Stakeholder engagement, conflicting stakeholder needs, lack of timely change management, not identifying all the stakeholders correctly, definitely resources and scope creep. Did I say scope creep? You guys, thank you for this. And we love the chat and we do save them. So if you just keep on with that. But Dan, I think that's enough to kind of prompt you. Lack of communication.
Okay, great. Well, if you can see, as you can see in this slide, you guys are right all on the same page. So you all can actually become high-paid researchers, because that's actually what this slide is in front of you. It's some high-paid researchers went out and studied a whole bunch of other studies about why project failed. I don't need to go to a researcher. I can get any 10 project managers in a room who've managed projects and ask them the question and going to come up with some of these same requirements or same risks. So this list in front of you is interesting. This is the top 7 of 10 other studies. So they pulled everything that you just mentioned were on those studies of why projects fail. But if you look at the commonalities from all the different perspectives and all the different types of projects, you hit on them. Misunderstanding of requirements, lack of management commitment, lack of user involvement, failure to gain user commitment, failure to manage end user expectation, and changes to requirements are all kind of core to why projects fail. And then lastly, if you don't have a methodology to mitigate these risks, that's an obvious opportunity to fail as well. So from an Agile perspective, without knowing anything about Agile and without having been through any training, I can tell you that the reason Agile exists today, it was to mitigate these risks and the risks that you came up with. So how we address requirements, well, we're not doing a good job in traditional waterfall. Let's find a different way to do it. What's working? And people have brainstormed that. How do we get management more involved? How do we get user more involved? How do we meet our users' expectations? The number one reason projects fail ultimately is not meeting our users' expectation. Scope creep, as you mentioned, not having the right resources, not having the right timeline, all of those ultimately result in an unhappy customer. So regardless of the root cause, if your customer is unhappy, the project fails. Changes to requirement is one of the things that Agile talks about as we're not going to prevent change, we're actually going to find a way to embrace change, because if the customer's happy, that's all that matters. And then again, having a methodology to handle all of these is key as well. So this study was done unrelated to Agile, but the more you learn about Agile, the more you understand that Agile is just a way to prevent project risks. And I could talk about this stuff for hours, and I do, but just that's to give you the flavor of what we mean by Agile as a risk mitigation strategy. So when we talk about being Agile, the term Agile is like a brand name. It comes from the Agile Manifesto. It's obviously based on the small a Agile, being more flexible, being more fluid, but the term Agile was born in 2001 from a small weekend conference of 17 best practice, mostly from the software development industry, lightweight framework practitioners and authors who are all finding success of reducing risk on their projects by trying different techniques. They only knew each other from seeing each other at conferences or maybe reading their papers in journals, because it wasn't the social media we have today and Twitter and all this other stuff to coordinate. They just heard of each other and they all got together, which is pretty incredible to think about it, that 17 people from all these different walks of life could get together for a weekend. And out of this weekend, they said, what are our commonalities between what we're doing? And that became the Agile Manifesto. It was 4 values and 12 principles where they basically agreed on, does this make sense? Are these best practices? Is there anything here that people are going to argue with? Or does it all make sense? And they really didn't believe it would have much staying power. They thought it was the beginning of a conversation. Fast forward 17 years, it hasn't changed at all. The values and principles have stayed intact. They're not necessarily perfectly written. That wasn't their goal. There's some overlap. So when I talk about the Agile Manifesto, when I train executives and I get people to pay attention in a very short amount of time, I summarize what it means to be Agile and what the Agile Manifesto means in 4 basic takeaways. And for those of you familiar with Agile, yes, there's a lot of nuances in here, and I'm not hitting every detail. But what most important to me when I talk about an organization that's trying to be Agile, there's 4 areas. The first is, can you deliver faster than you do today? And fast means whatever is appropriate for you. For some organizations, fast can be every hour. For some organizations, if they could get to delivering 4 times a year, that could be fast. The Agile Manifesto talks about trying to get it down to a couple of months, because 17 years ago, that felt fast. So fast is whatever is appropriate for your organization, your overhead, your release schedule, what your customers can consume, how your contracts are written. But you need to start somewhere and define a new fast. And then you have to build all the tools and teams and technology to get you there. And over time, fast changes for people. The second thing, you can be fast without being Agile. And so the second thing that's really core to Agile is the idea of having small teams that are empowered. Scrum talks about teams of 3 people to 9 people. Other frameworks give recommendations on team size. But there's a lot of productivity studies, and thank you, Heather, for telling me it's Productivity Day. But they have found through numerous studies, regardless of Agile, that the smaller the team, the more productivity that team can deliver. So a team of 3 can deliver more productivity. This sounds crazy, but a team of 3 software developers can actually deliver more work than a team of 10 software developers, purely through coordination and communication. And don't trust me, read papers on it, understand some of the case studies on this, and I practice it in real life. I didn't believe it when I heard this stuff, but I practiced it, and it's truly astounding if you have the right small empowered teams. And empowered means we give them power. We give them autonomy. We give them a problem to solve, and it's their job to figure out how to solve it. So that means not giving them a spec to write software. That means defining a very clear problem statement, hiring people with the skills to solve that problem, and then allowing them to work to achieve the solution. Major shift in how companies work around software development. Those companies that make this shift to empowered teams see what we call hyper-productivity. The third part, and this is the most important part that I learned over the years, when I first learned Scrum, they didn't talk as much about value. They talked about small teams, and they talked about deliver fast, short iterations and sprints. I was on a very large project from 2005 to 2007, and we were migrating to Agile. We were doing iterative development. We were doing fast development, but it was all architecturally based. We were building this incredible platform for millions of users. And about a year into it, we showed it to our customer, and we had spent $12 million at this point. We had showed it to our customer, and we showed them login. Now, after $12 million, our customer was an internal customer who's going to be reselling it. They said, I don't feel like $12 million is a very good use for login. It was a $40 million project. We had a roadmap that by around $35 million, we would start delivering value to the customer, but this was a foundational, massive project. The project ultimately got canceled within 6 months just because the politics and the willingness of people to move in that direction, and time had passed since we started. From my perspective, it was just very painful. I gave 2 years of my life to that project and had to walk away because we had missed an opportunity with all these smart people, incredible technology, to deliver value sooner and get customer buy-in so they would keep giving us money. So value-driven delivery is how can we shift our delivery schedule to bring value forward. It may mean that we have to spend a little more money up front to design, build, and test something that we may have to change later on, but companies want to justify their investment. Many of you may have heard this concept of minimum viable product, MVP. The idea with MVP is build the bare minimum, and I call it minimum valuable product, the minimum valuable piece of the product that you can give to a customer that you can either get feedback on, make money on, create some savings. Once you've justified that, then they'll give you more money. And many large organizations are moving in that direction. They're treating projects like startups. They're not going to give you a 3-year budget anymore. They'll give you a placeholder for 3 years, but they're going to ask you to come to them every 3 months, 6 months, a year and say, tell me why I should keep giving you money. And the only way to do that is to do value-driven delivery, get feedback, and reinforce why you should get that money. And number 4, and this is the most subtle one, is all of these things are trial and error. If you go to a training and learn Scrum, how you implement Scrum is going to be unique to your organization. If you start with 2 weeks and 2 weeks doesn't work, you need to change to 3 weeks or change to 1 week for your iterations. The only way that you're going to do that and make those changes is if you create a process for continuous improvement. Realize that whatever you try today is subject to change. Allow it to change to improve where you're going. So make sure there's an umbrella and a culture of continuous improvement when you implement Agile. Don't spend all your time creating this perfect framework, roll it out and say, hey, everyone, just follow this method and everything's going to be perfect. That's not how Agile works, and that's not how businesses should be run. So that's what I mean. That's what it means to be Agile. That's where the Agile Manifesto comes from. And that's what we want to consider if we reflect on where our organization is today. Which one of these 4 can we spend some time on to become more agile? So if we do all this, the expectation is we're going to be more successful. You're on the phone call maybe because you've heard about Agile, you've started practicing it, you're not really sure why we're doing it, not understanding the benefits or reaping the rewards of being Agile. The bottom line is if we do Agile, we're going to have more flexibility in our requirements. If we have these shorter iterations and value-driven delivery, we're only going to write requirements for this first delivery. If we get the right feedback and our customers are happy, then we will make more detailed requirements. You'll still have a roadmap, you'll still have a big picture release plan, but we're not going to write a 300-page business requirement document to cover 18 months of delivery if we're not even sure what the customer's feedback is going to be after the first month. We build in these small increments and iterations. We chunk up our work, which is iterations, and we chunk up our time. This cycle of continuous improvement allows us to address errors sooner. Every time I deliver, the expectation is I'm going to get feedback. It's kind of a reverse benefit, but we call it, if we're going to fail, let's fail fast. We don't want to wait 9 months to find out we built the wrong thing. Let's start 2 weeks, show it to a customer, another 2 weeks, and if we're going down the wrong path, we're going to find out very quickly. These small teams, this alignment with the business, these short iterations, ultimately will increase your overall organization and team efficiency. There's a myth that there's no documentation in Agile because the Agile Manifesto refers to working software over comprehensive documentation. What we talk about in Agile is we want to decrease unnecessary or wasteful documentation. So again, you might still need the same level of detail as that 300-page spec, but you're not going to write it at the beginning. You're going to write the first 10 pages for the first sprint, get some feedback, write the next 10 pages, and tweak it and just write the necessary documentation, because any artifact you create before a project starts is doomed to have to go through some sort of change control process because there's so much detail that needs to evolve. As I mentioned from the takeaways, providing a value-based approach to development is core to Agile. Ensuring that everything you do, again, referring to that 300-page spec, page 1, if you have that today, and you are going to convert an old project to Agile, take that 300-page document, hand it out to everybody and say, which page is most important? Page 50 is more important, it's now page 1. We provide value-based, the most important stuff gets done first. And Agile is appropriate for any size organization. It can be right-sized to small organizations, large organizations. There's lots of different frameworks that support that, but these philosophies and these takeaways should apply to any organization. Organizations that understand that there's a strategic agility and there's an execution agility are the ones that are most successful. You can't just execute at the team level Scrum and expect to be successful long-term. You will see some success in the short term, but until the organization becomes more agile or more agile-minded, you're going to be faced with challenges. So successful Agile projects, and look at any you have today that you would want to convert, you need to be able to switch to some sort of iterative, time-based, or continuous delivery model. It's really hard to be Agile if you don't have good engineering practices. If all of your testing is manual, it's really hard to deliver fast and make changes. Heavy customer involvement. You need, whether your customer is an internal customer or you have product owners or business analysts or people who are representing the customers, you need them involved daily to have a successful Agile project. I truly mean that. It needs to be involved every single day. We can't just show it to customers at the end of 2 weeks. We want someone to be able to ask questions throughout this process. Value-driven planning. Again, you need to write a project plan and a release plan that has return on your investment built into the plan. It's not a milestone plan anymore, it's a dollar plan. And lastly, having small teams in co-located spaces is the one of the best ways to build this. This is not often easy for large organizations that are geographically dispersed, but if you can get people in the same room, break down the walls, both literally and figuratively, and keep them small, you're going to see the highest level of productivity. Counter to everything I just said, there are some projects that do not need to be very agile. And the way we determine that is we take a look at the requirements. Is the project something you've done before? The requirements aren't going to change, and you have good resources, you have the good skills, and you can pretty much predict the outcome up front. If that's the case, you don't need to be very agile. That's called a predictive project. You can still adhere to a traditional or waterfall approach. If your projects constantly undergo change, either from the marketplace or from your customers or for other reasons, you need to be more agile. So understanding this continuum here, predictive to agile around your requirements, predictive to adaptive around your requirements, is key to determine what framework. The number 4 failure reason right now for why Agile projects fail is that they're trying to squeeze Agile or force Agile on a non-Agile framework. You can't build a house in Agile. You can't decide you want to change the foundation after you've already put the roof on and not realize that that's a significant cost. The same thing is true for many other projects. So again, I'll put this on chat, and Robin or Heather, please chime in. What is going on in your organizations? Is there a need to be more agile or adaptive? What types of changes are your projects experiencing today?
Go ahead and chat in. And Dan, while I'm waiting for some of those answers to come in, Roger asked about using online collaborative tools like Mural or others. And I've never heard of Mural before, Roger, so you got me there.
Yeah, we do talk a lot about any sort of technique to be more collaborative. So if you're not all sitting in the same room, you don't have that luxury and people are geographically dispersed, making sure you're using video conferencing, whether it's something like this, a tool when you're discussing things, making sure you're using collaborative tools like Mural or the interactive whiteboards. Amazon now has this crazy $5,000 TV screen that builds in a whiteboard and printing and video conferencing all built in. There's all sorts of tools out there right now for being collaborative. The number one thing you want to avoid is just communicating via the written word. So anything that creates more of an interaction, a more robust interaction. It's always great to be able to see people's face, body language. That's a key part. Hearing words, hearing someone speak rather than reading a written word, and then having any sort of picture that you can draw to explain and ask for clarification on interactive whiteboards is key as well.
All right. Thank you for that. I haven't seen Mural. We use a tool. You guys have seen it from Contentia. We use the Weave tool, which is super fun and cool. I have comments here. Thomas says, we love being agile as we let our teams know that we deliver top priorities every 3 weeks. Oh my gosh, that's awesome. Way to go. We also have another comment from Thomas that they use Jira and Stride. And Mary talks about getting up to speed on Slack. So Jira and Stride, can we talk about the differences? I don't know if you're
Yeah, I
able
don't
to
know
talk about those?
Stride so much. Jira right now is about 2/3, if not higher, of the marketplace. You know, again, these are all tools to collaborate, tools for traceability, tools for transparency into your Agile process. You know, I go back to my old project management training where my mentor told me a fool with the tool is still a fool.
Yes.
So I spend a lot of time focusing on the tools until my team has mastered our Agile implementation. At that point, then I focused, how can we use the tools to be enablers? How can I use the tools to provide more transparency to my stakeholders? There's lots of good tools out there. Jira is not the best tool, but it's by far the most popular. Stride, I don't know of it, which means it's probably one of the better tools out there written by a smaller company.
We have a couple other comments about that. Didn't mean to cut you off there. I want to TFS, so Team Foundation Server. Kelly Douglas uses that. And then Victor asks about using ServiceNow for Agile project management. And Dan, I don't know if you can address the ServiceNow. I might be able to address that one. But what about TFS? Are you familiar with
TFS, their new product, they have a cloud product now called VSDS, and it's all Agile enabled, similar to, you know, TFS has a full lifecycle tracking tool, works with the build process. Again, like Jira. So if you're a Microsoft shop and you already have that, TFS has become much more agile with their VSDS cloud platform. So, yep.
Yep. And have you used ServiceNow? Have you been in a ServiceNow environment using
I have
Agile?
not. From the sounds of it, it sounds like a service tool, which is what Jira was originally. So I'm sure there's commonalities there. Yeah.
Well, it's actually ITSM, right? ServiceNow is more like a service desk or ticketing software, how it started. But Victor, I've seen the ServiceNow folks every upgrade can, you know, continue to add more Agile functionality with the visual task boards and things. So it's interesting, but it's not going to do like velocity and things like that. Like some of the other.
I would guess it probably will soon, because Jira was a ticketing system. And if you go into
Oh.
Jira and you go to create a requirement, it's still called an issue. So Jira's whole back end is, that's why it became popular, because a lot of people were using Jira. It was a pretty low cost ticketing system. And that's how it got its foot in. So
Interesting.
Yeah. So when we talk about, you know, being agile again is a philosophy, it's a set of values and principles. How you be agile is up to you. You can adopt a very specific framework, or you can come up with your own approach. So right now, 75% of companies are using Scrum or some version of Scrum, at least using the roles of Scrum Master, Product Owner, and Team, using the Scrum events. They may be using Scrumban, which is a combination with Kanban. They might be using Scrum and XP, Scrum and Extreme Programming. The version 1, if you folks haven't downloaded or read the version 1 survey, they do it every year. It's an Agile survey, and it's got some great information, some great insights. And this year, for the first time, I don't know if they phrased the question differently, but the number of frameworks has been reduced significantly, probably from 10 to about 6. And now people self-reporting that they're using their own custom hybrid is now 15% of the market. So people are taking from these frameworks and creating their own frameworks, ultimately, that are organization specific. You may have heard of Spotify framework. Spotify has an Agile approach that now I don't know if they're selling it, but people are actually adopting the Spotify Agile framework. So there's lots of different ways to be Agile. Scrum focuses on small cross-functional teams, 2 to 4 week sprints. Again, teams from 3 to 9 people, role of Scrum Master, role of Product Owner, and a cross-functional team role. Extreme Programming is probably the best written framework out there for software development teams. People don't typically use their roles or their meetings. They use the Scrum ones, but all of the engineering best practices are pretty much captured in Extreme Programming. Extreme Programming has been around for 20 years now. So they have things like continuous integration, automated testing, collective code ownership, any best practices that you do today in your software shop. Many of those came from Kent Beck and that group on Extreme Programming, and they're still the top authors in that community. Large projects, teams of 50 plus are now using very formal scaled approaches. SAFe is the most popular now. They have about 65% of the market of scaled approaches. They all assume that the individual teams are doing Scrum, but then how do those Scrum teams coordinate? Again, SAFe says it's good for 50 plus. If you have between 9 people and 50, you can use a more informal Scrum of Scrums type of approach, but they all have the same sort of structure, which is we need some way to manage the product across teams, and we need some way to manage the dependencies across teams. So as I mentioned earlier, there are reasons that Agile can still be challenging. This question is asked in that same survey. They took it off of the 11th version, so if you print out the latest one, they've changed this question around, but for the first 10 years, they asked people, what is your barrier to implementing Agile? What's keeping you or what's challenging you? And the number one reason is culture. It's not, we don't have the right people, we don't have the right tools, we don't have the right skills, we don't have the right customers. It's just changing culture, and this is what I see today. Having done this for so long, you would think that everywhere I go now, everyone's doing Agile, and you would face this in your own organizations. No, there's been a lot of failed Agile implementations. It takes a long time. A new manager will come in and say, why are we doing this? It doesn't seem to be working. They'll throw it out. And the reasons it's failing is changing culture. Again, it could be something as simple as, well, we have to deliver every 2 weeks, but we have a culture of manual testing, and we have a separate QA department, and they don't talk together, so we're going to keep that separate. And it takes 3 weeks to regression test every time we have a 2-week sprint. Well, that's a culture change. Or we have to flatten our organization and just have, functional managers, teams, and have people working more closely and getting rid of that hierarchy within projects. That could be the culture change. It could be that we just don't want to talk to our customers as much as you want us to. We're not in that position. A lot of the government organizations I work with, they just aren't in a position to interact or get feedback from a customer because everything is a written report, and it takes 6 months if they want to make a change. That's not going to happen. The second one is general resistance to change. That's just you. That's just you and me being resistant to change. We all are habitual people. There's very few people that can wake up every day and do a different routine. Everybody gets up, they brush their teeth, they have their coffee, they go to work in the same way every day. If someone interrupts that routine, they get very frustrated. Well, that's what Agile does. It interrupts your routine. And so it takes a while to break through that change. I mentioned this earlier, forcing Agile onto a waterfall framework, forcing Agile onto a hardware project sometimes is a waste of time. Forcing Agile onto an operations team that does upgrades every 3 months, they don't need to go in and meet every day and talk about that. And lastly, if you don't have management support for all of this, obviously it's going to fail. Sometimes I go into companies and I'm training and I've been hired by HR because some manager says, I need my people trained on Agile. I go in, I do my training, and about halfway through, I start to get a sense of body language, something's going on, and someone inadvertently says, do our managers know what you're telling us? This is a lot of changes from how we do the work today. And oftentimes the managers don't know what it means to be Agile. They've just signed off on a training budget without realizing the amount of change that it has to occur. So these are the top 4 reasons that Agile can be challenged. In addition to that, the other question is, well, okay, now you're doing Agile, you've gotten through the initial barrier, and it still fails. Well, again, some sort of company philosophy or culture sabotages it. The next level is really having no experience, not training people, not giving them the tools they need, no management support, no support for that culture change, not applying these practices uniformly, still getting some sort of external pressure to follow traditional processes, regulations, stage gates, PMOs that haven't been brought into the fold that are still asking you to complete a Gantt chart where you're doing burn down charts, ineffective collaboration, general organizational communication issues, unwillingness at the team level to adopt Agile, inability to continuously prioritize work. That's typically when you don't have that product owner role or a good product management function. insufficient training, that's where me and Omnicron come in. We can solve that one. And ineffective collaboration. So how do you succeed? The bottom line is you need to change the paradigm. You have to get buy-in that what you're doing wasn't working and we need to do something different. If everybody thinks that what you do today is just fine, and I've worked with companies like that, and maybe it is for them, then Agile's going to fail. There's too much change. The next is, we're not going to spend a lot of effort and energy tracking % complete of all different people's effort unless we're delivering working software. That's the only true measure of success. Are we delivering an ultimately valuable software? And then the final part is, if I'm going to move to empowered teams, I need to trust my people to get the job done. I can't tell you how many organizations I go in where I do this training, an old hierarchical type of organization, and they say, well, people need to be told what to do. We can't trust them to do this. And I just went through this week. Someone said, well, they see me as very angry. I'm their scrum master. And I'm telling them that they need to do this, need to do this. And because I know they're going to fail if they don't. And so I stopped the whole class and I said, okay, this is going to be hard for you to hear. But one of the values of short iterations is you can let them fail. So the biggest learning you can do with that team that doesn't believe you or doesn't want to do it your way, as a scrum master, is you need to stop talking. You need to move to an environment of trust, see if their way could work, or let them fail, and then let them come up with ways to prevent the failure in the future. And it may be exactly what you're saying, but people need to learn on their own once you move to Agile, because you've trained them that they have some power. So, a lot of takeaways here. Delivering iteratively and incrementally is the most basic success criteria of your Agile implementation. So if nothing else, if you are used to delivering every 3 months and there's value to delivering more quickly, then that's key. If you're used to delivering once a year, there's definitely some opportunity there. Without value-driven delivery, you're not Agile. $12 million login is not Agile. It doesn't matter how iterative you are. More creativity and productivity are going to come from those self-organized teams. You're going to see, again, that 3-person team be extremely creative and extremely productive. And don't worry about perfection. Agile focuses a lot on the 80-20 rule, and I err more on the 95-5 rule, which is 95% of the value with 5% of the effort. Just get started. Try it out, and then focus on continuous improving. So how do you get there? Start with training. Make sure everybody is on the same page, understands consistent terminology, agrees what do we mean by a sprint, what is the role of the Scrum Master, are we doing cross-functional teams? Everybody has to understand Agile in the same way. I'm not saying you have to adopt Scrum or have to adopt Kanban, but whatever you adopt, be consistent and train everyone in the organization. The next is start doing it. Just pick some projects. Typically, I pick the hardest projects that are struggling with traditional, that have maybe a difficult customer or have lots of change. Adopt a consistent, lightweight Agile framework. And lastly, commit to that continuous improvement culture. So that was a lot out there. I know it wasn't a lot of slides, but it was a lot of content. I'm open to any questions now.
Excellent. Dan, that was a lot. My mind is racing. One thing that I think we should clarify, and Sam brings up a good point, is can we just spend a minute, we might have done this earlier, the difference just between Agile and Scrum, because we do toss those words back interchangeably, but there is a little bit of a nuance between them. How would you define, Agile versus Scrum?
Yeah, it's as simple as Agile is a philosophy and Scrum is a framework to be Agile. So I always present it as a Venn diagram. Agile is this big circle, and there's lots of ways to be Agile. I have Scrum, extreme programming, safe, all of these are within that Venn diagram. And for those of you who are Venn diagram people, outside of Agile is even lean. We have lean. Is my organization efficient? Agile, am I adopting these Agile values and principles? And then Scrum is just a technique to adopt Agile values and principles.
And if you weren't using Scrum as a technique, would you use Kanban? I mean, what would be some replacement? That's all good. What would be a replacement? If it wasn't Scrum, what would it be?
Yeah, so Scrum is just popular because people love the term Scrum for some reason. You can invent your own. Do you have the PMI has an Agile practice guide now that they just printed about last September. It's not great written, but they basically taken the word Scrum out of a generic framework. So they have a role of team facilitator, a role of a product owner, and some sort of cross-functional team. They have some core meetings. So if you're going to do iterative development, you're going to do an Agile approach, you need kind of those three roles: some facilitator, some product owner, and some team members to do the work. Kanban is an approach. It's Roger just put up as a tool. It came from manufacturing. I'm an industrial engineer by training. I learned Kanban when I was working in a factory after college. Kanban means in Japanese, it's a visual board, a signboard. It's been adopted as a framework or a methodology, but really what it is just a way to visually represent your workflow.
Okay.
Scrumban, and we use in Scrum terms, and we have a more visual workflow. Extreme programming is a better framework. In the UK, for those of you who are familiar with Prince, there's a big PMP or PMI equivalent in Europe. It's based out of the UK. It's called Prince. Well, that same kind of audience has adopted ADSM, Adaptive Dynamic System, or you can probably put it up, as their version of Scrum. So everybody there does ADSM or ADSM. And it's, again, very similar type of framework, different rules, etc. So it doesn't matter what framework you do. I have organizations that write their own. And again, that's that new 15%. But still, even the ones that are writing their own seem to like that role of Scrum Master.
Okay, I like that. That was a good question, and that led to a couple other things. John has a great question, little coaching here. Let's see how you can do this with minimal information, Dan. I've
seen that question. My worst was
like the $6 million question. How can I compress my regression testing that takes 8 weeks? Yeah. How can I shrink that?
I think I might know where you work, John. I think I've been there. The number one way is automation. So for organizations who have legacy products, who have this big regression suite that's run either even partly manual, part automated, the organizations that I've seen reduce it, as they enhance the product, they also create a parallel project of creating automation for their pre-existing test cases. So it becomes a whole project to build a regression test suite that's fully automated. Some regression suites are long just because they align with some sort of market data. Say, for example, a reporting project, they need to gather data for 30 days, and then they need to do a monthly report, and then they need to do some other reports, and they have to gather data and replicate all that. So the regression test suite can't really be shortened. It can be simulated, and that requires a lot of hardware and a lot of attention. But ultimately, the simple answer is lots of money spent on automating all those legacy regression test scripts that are probably being run manually.
What do you think about that, John? I'd like to see some chats from you. While John's noodling on that, and thank you, Dan, go back to your Venn diagram for me. You're kind of doing a mental visual picture for us. Dan, yeah. Where does DevOps fit into this whole, Agile, Scrum, DevOps?
So this is a funny one for me, because when DevOps came out, I was shocked. I was like, you really need to tell people that the operations people should be participating in your project? Because when I was on large software development projects, we always brought a system engineer and operations people into the project, so they handled all the tooling, all the environment work, all that stuff to support the project. But that was the culture of the organizations that I started doing Agile with. Roger says, LOL. Many organizations, operations is a completely separate group, and they don't get along with dev. There's actually animosity between those. So DevOps basically just says, and it's a fancy word for saying, Operations and development needs to be working together every day, just like we do with the business people, to ensure that we can deliver value. That's it. That's all it is. But the sophistication in the frameworks and all the other training to get there is complicated if you don't do that today. For some organizations, that's not a challenge at all because that's how they're built. They're product organizations. If you're a project-based organization or a very siloed or functional-based organization, that's where making a deliberate DevOps approach is key.
I'm thinking on that. Thank you for that explanation because it raises a whole slew of new tools. I'm seeing very large organizations now go off to DevOps, to the DevOps horizon, and they're reorganizing completely. And I keep scratching my head at that because it seems like way too much effort for something that doesn't require that much effort. So
yeah, the reality is they need to organize around product. And if they organize around product, then DevOps is a natural piece of that.
Mm-hmm.
They just try to merge the people, not around the product, then they're still going to face the challenge of, well, how do we align around product? So.
Okay, I like that. That was a good, unexpected, great answer. Thank you for that. So, all right. So John says that he's going to have some fun with with your answer regarding reducing the regression testing timeframe. What other questions I would like to see from everybody here? We have about 76 folks hanging out with us today right now. I'd like to hear from all of you. What's a percentage of what percentage are you guys actually using Agile Scrum? Are you is your whole organization using it? Are you using it in pockets? Has everybody bought in? Are you slowly getting there? So Thomas says 30%, which is interesting to me, Thomas, because from some of your answers, I would have thought you would have been even more. Can you give me some feedback on why only 30%? Debbie says 50%. Sam is using it in pockets. So let's hear it. It's just really good feedback for us. We started training Agile and Scrum in 2007. And here we are in 2018. And it's interesting because it felt like for 10 years, the whole world chased IT service management. And now it's like Scrum's having a resurgence. I would have thought everybody would have learned Scrum and Agile. So do you have any comments for me, Dan, on that? What's up with this resurgence? It feels like it.
I think it goes all the way back to the culture change. There's just a lot of restarting. Cultures tried it early on. I mean, companies tried it, but they didn't have the culture for it. Now it's becoming more urgent, or in some organizations less urgent. There's just a lot of politics around Agile. It's incredible.
You know what's interesting when you said it earlier, and you guys, I really like these answers. So if you haven't chatted in yet, please let us see. And we're happy to share this chat with you so you can also share it. But Dan, right, the difference between going full PMP and all of the rigor, right, that it takes to even pass the test and maintain your cert compared to a 1 day or, few days of a Scrum training. I think part of it's there, right? Mm-hmm. The Scrum training is so quick and there's games and it's so fun that I think the companies might not have gotten everything they needed out of the training or fully understood how much changing they were going to need to do. It's elusive.
Yep.
So I see some, so Dan says 10% just dipping in. Don, do you want to give us some more feedback? And Joellen, is there are you guys seriously looking at moving to more Agile and Scrum, or are things going pretty well right now if it's only around 10%? And any other comments regarding we're using it about 40%, but we're having to educate upper management. So Dan, you probably get a lot of that too. I know that we do. Companies will bring us in to do full-on training, and everyone is getting trained except for the execs, which I find, that's a recipe for disaster.
Yeah, it's unfortunately too common. This week I was fortunate. I went in, I'd already booked 4 trainings with this client, training the Scrum Masters, the team members, and the product owners. And I was halfway through the Scrum Master training and the HR person comes in. I just booked the executives. I'm getting so much people are emailing me all during this training that my executives need to hear it. And luckily I just happened to hit the right group first who had enough influence to realize that the executive should be getting some of that training. So it's the biggest gap from a training perspective is the executives sometimes are never trained. I'd say out of the hundreds of clients I've trained, about only 25 to 30% have trained the executives as part of that implementation.
That is interesting. I think we should write a white paper just on that. Does anybody have a really good story for us in chat of, definitely see huge improvement, hooray for Scrum, it's going better. I know it's hard to put that all in a chat, but I'd like to see that. Like Roger says, yes, definitely executive support is vital. I will tell you guys, and we just have a few minutes left, but we had a company, 100-year-old company, that they had like this never-ending project. It was between the United States and Japan, and it was logistics software for, we're moving our trucks across the United States, and they have to pick things up and deliver. And they had all kinds of new regulations that they had to write code for. And it was just never ending. Okay, this was the never ending song, the never ending project. So we picked that one to do a Scrum training with. And sure enough, they completed the project. They brought it through to a happy conclusion. It was so interesting because we really did bring in the product owners and the management team, and we were able to bring that never ending project to a happy conclusion. So that was one of my best Scrum Agile initiatives. Anyone else on very successful as far as?
Roger's got a good one.
So Roger says, okay, we've seen the executive support at that level embrace and roll out Agile. And Roger works for a very big and impressive company, everybody. Has 3 letters. It starts with an I and it ends with an M. So, he says to the entire organization, along with blockchain, and okay, let's throw something new in there. So blockchain, and we've seen the benefits of that. It's been successful and continues to be ongoing. But we also get executive support in 40 hours of training a year at IBM. Yes. So
IBM's been in front of this for a while. So
yeah, definitely. Well, it's good to see. If a company as large as IBM can be agile, right? Of course, Google is very agile. I think Google releases daily.
Every team's different there. So
okay.
Some teams aren't even agile. Some teams are hyper agile. It depends.
Interesting. Well, I think we're coming up on our close time. So if are there any other questions for Dan while you have them, please get them in now. And Dan, that was really, it's always such a good overview, and you said some things that really stuck in my memory. So we'll talk about those in a minute with the backstage. But with that, you guys, I'm going to, yes, thank you, Thomas. Well, actually, Thomas, you said something that's interesting. Thomas said he loves these sessions. So let me address that for a second, and then we will go ahead and close this up. So thank you, everybody, for your attendance. A few things from today is that Heather will be emailing you the slide deck and also the recordings and a PDU certificate. Now, we have an opportunity for you if you're a PMP and you are gathering up your PDUs. You can get 2 PDUs, if you respond to our survey, right? So we figure it probably takes you an hour to noodle on the survey. And so we give you an extra PDU for filling out our survey. It doesn't really take an hour, but so make sure to take advantage of that. We really like the feedback. We are going to take these sessions to quarterly, effective after today. We're going to take a little bit of a summer respite. I think our cybersecurity teacher has some really important things that he wants to announce. And so I think we'll pick this back up with a focus on cybersecurity and how to be agile with cybersecurity. And then one thing that Omnikron is going to start to introduce is more 4-hour classes. So we will open those up to a small group of people for free and get lots of student participation, and then we'll sell those afterwards. So we're changing our business model a little bit. And Roger, the reason you made me think of it was because one of the classes I want to do is a sort of a blockchain overview. I want to do also a bunch of other things. So if you have things that you'd like to know about and more in depth, then please let us know, either in email or let Heather know, hey, can you guys spend a little bit more time? So we're going to intersperse the PDU webinars with more free training. So those are, some new things coming up. And with that, you can also hit up our PDU page, which Brad has there for you, omnicron.com broadcast-library. And you can pick up any of the old sessions. If this is your first time here, we have managed to arrange everything and categorize it according to the PMI talent triangle. So if you need to get specific points in specific areas, please definitely take advantage of that free training. It's all there for you. And with that, I've got to give a shout out to you, Dan. Thank you very much. This was awesome as usual. Thank you.